This design is widely viewed as the best ground attack aircraft of World War II, and it was built in the Soviet Union. It was robust and crewed, but could take a great amount of damage, and in return deliver devastating attacks with its heavy armament. With more than 36,000 units built, it's the single most produced military aircraft in history. This was the Soviet Ilyushin Il-2 Shturmovik. So let's see the history of this aircraft today. During the 1930s, many countries around the world started to modernize their military and of course their air force. The political developments forced the countries to modernize, and the advances in aviation saw a rapid change in aircraft design and development. In the cauldron of the Spanish Civil War, the supporting countries, like Germany on the nationalist side and the Soviet Union on the Republican side, all gathered experience with their new designs and their use in combat. Both countries sent many different military planes to be tested in this conflict, like the Ju-87 Stuka, the HS-123 attack plane, and the Ju-111 bomber from the German side, or the Polikarpov I-16 from the Soviet Union. I have made videos on many of these already. You can find the links to them in the description. A strong takeaway from the fighting in Spain was the need for dedicated ground attack aircraft, with strong armament and armor to protect them from anti-aircraft fire. In the early 1930s, several Soviet designs tried to fill this role, like the TSH-1 and TSH-2 armored biplanes, but these were mostly just modifications of existing designs, and they were held back by the weak engines and airframes. They were followed by a few purpose-built designs like the TSH-3 or the Kocherygin LBSH, but none of these were successful enough to be mass-produced. Finally, Sergei Ilyushin and his team proposed a design in early 1938, which was centered around survivability and firepower. It was an ingenious design, incorporating a 700 kg armored shell, with the thickness between 6 and 30 mm around the cockpit, engine and fuel tanks, which was also a load-bearing part of the airframe, saving a lot of weight. The planned armament was 7.62 mm machine guns and 20 mm cannons, and additional capability to carry bombs and rockets as well. The Central Design Bureau accepted his design and ordered 2 prototypes. The 2-seater TSKB-55 model was finished first, and it flew in October 1939. During the test flights it was found to be overweight and underpowered with its 1370 horsepower AM-35 engine, and as a result it was too slow. It only reached a top speed of 362 km an hour, instead of the required 380-400. The second prototype, the TSKB-57, made its maiden flight a year later, in October 1940. This variant was redesigned as a lighter single-seater aircraft, with the rear gunner position replaced with an aerodynamic fairing, and it featured the more powerful 1682 horsepower AM-38 engine. As a result, this new variant reached 423 km an hour top speed, above the expectations. The Ilyushin design was pitted against the Sukhoi Su-6 in a competition, and while many thought the Su-6 was the better candidate, but it missed deadlines for the development, so in the end the Ilyushin design was declared as a winner, and it received the Air Force designation BSH-2. The design managed to pass the remaining trials in record time, and just 5 months later it was accepted to service as IR-2, and the Shturmovik was born. Let's spend a moment to explain the name. Shturmovik was just a general term for ground attack aircraft in the Soviet Union, but being the most effective type amongst these aircraft, it stuck to the IR-2. Just like the Stuka name stuck to the German Ju-87, despite it being just a short version for Stutzkampfflugzeug, literally meaning dive attack aircraft. In May 1941, just 2 months after it was officially accepted into service, deliveries to the units already started. And by the time the first IR-2s arrived to the units, Germany attacked the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa, and these planes immediately found themselves in the thick of the fighting. The first few months of combat experience and the reports from the pilots so resulted in a big redesign of the aircraft. As it often happens, the reality of the combat was very different from the drawing board. The armament on the aircraft, namely the 20mm cannons, were found to be less effective against some of the German armored vehicles. So new 23mm weapons were tested, initially the Taubin MP6 variants, which were soon replaced by the new Volkov-Yartsev 23mm belt-fed cannons. The fighting against the German forces also showed that the low-flying, slow ground attack aircraft was easy prey for the German fighters, as the combat missions flown at 50 to 150 meters altitude made it impossible to give them fighter cover, and the lack of defensive armament effectively made them sitting ducks. These experiences forced the redevelopment of the two-seater variant, which started its trials in early 1942. The new variant had a longer fuselage and canopy, and featured a 12.7mm machine gun as a defensive weapon. Though these changes increased the total weight by almost 200 kilograms, soon after the two-seater variants entered service, the upgraded AM38F engine became available, providing 1,750 horsepower, so it balanced out the added weight. And to see all the changes made to the aircraft over its lifetime, let's take a look at its variants. The TSKB-55 was a two-seat prototype, built with the AM35 engine. The following TSKB-57 was the single-seat variant, with the more powerful AM38 engine. The IL-2 was the first production variant, entering service in May 1941, featuring the single-seat cockpit, the AM38 engine, and 20 and later 23mm cannons. In 1942, based on the frontline experiences, the two-seater IL-2 variants appeared, featuring a rear gunner position with a 12.7mm machine gun. The IL-2 M82 was a backup design, in case the AM38 engine production would run into delays. It used the M82 air-cooled radial engine and featured a two-seat cockpit with the rear gunner position and improved armor plating. By 1943, the type was further upgraded in the form of the IL-2M variant, with the new stronger AM38F engine, and the 20mm cannons were fully dropped in favor of the 23mm ones. Also in 1943, the IL-2 Model 3M, in short IL-2 3M, appeared, which featured new 37mm anti-tank cannons under the wings. By 1944, the IL-2 Type 3 model was introduced, which featured 15-degree sweep on the outer wing panels, to help with stability issues caused by the addition of the rear gunner position. During 1943-1944, the idea to convert the aircraft to a bomber-destroyer surfaced, and this led to the development of the IL-2L and later the IL-1 variants. The IL-2L was just a modified IL-2 variant, with the rear gunner position and all unnecessary equipment removed. Thanks to these modifications, the type was more than 700 kilograms lighter than the original design. Despite the weight saving, the top speed was only 415 kilometers an hour, barely an improvement over the base design, so it was a disappointment. But the arrival of the 2000 horsepower AM42 engine gave the fighter design another boost, and with a new, more streamlined fuselage built around this engine, the IL-1 variant was created. This version during the trials managed to reach 580 km an hour speed, but since by this time there were several very capable Soviet fighters in service, and the German Air Force was very much on the defensive, this aircraft was not needed anymore. However, Ilyushin decided to turn the new variant again into a two-seater ground attack aircraft, thus creating the new IL-10 design. As it turned out during trials, this plane was actually better than the IL-8 variant, which was meant to be the successor of the IL-2. So the new IL-10 model was ordered into production in August 1944, and they were built until 1954. The IL-2 was 11.65 meters long, with a wingspan of 14.6 meters. It had an empty weight of 4,425 kilograms and a maximum takeoff weight of 6,360 kilograms. The plane was powered by a single Mikulin AM38F engine, producing 1,720 horsepower. With this engine, the plane's top speed was 410 km an hour, with a cruise speed of 320 km an hour. It had a range of 765 km and a service ceiling of 4,500 meters. It boasted a wide variation of offensive weaponry, with two 23mm cannons and two 7.62mm machine guns as main armament, and as secondary armament it could carry either 8 RS-82 or 4 RS-132 rockets and 600 kilograms of bombs. Around 250 of these planes were built before the German invasion of the Soviet Union, but only about 70 were in service when the fighting began. And the aircraft was so new, the pilots were only trained to take off and land. None of them ever used the armament on these planes, and the ground crews didn't even know how to maintain them. Despite the lack of experience, the IL-2s were sent to combat almost immediately, as the situation was dire. The 5th Ground Attack Regiment flew the first combat mission with the type on 27th of June 1941, just 5 days after the start of the German invasion. It tells a lot about the intensity of the fighting and the stress on the first IL-2 crews that by July only 18 pilots and 10 IL-2s remained, from the 65 initially sent to the regiment. Nonetheless, the aircraft was effective, the pilots learned how to use it over time, and new tactics were implemented, like the so-called Circle of Death, when the IL-2 squadrons formed a defensive circle above the battlefield, covering each other and one by one attacked the ground targets, then returned to the circle, effectively keeping the ground forces under constant attack while minimizing their own risk. Occasionally the IL-2 was used in air-to-air combat as well, and though these planes were no match for the agile German fighters, but the slow bombers, reconnaissance planes, and the Ju-87 dive bombers were all easy prey for the heavy armament of the Shturmovik. After the appearance of the two-seater variants in 1942, the losses decreased. However, the lack of armor plating around the gunner position left the gunners exposed to enemy fire, and they suffered almost 4 times more casualties than the pilots who were protected by the armored shell of the aircraft. Only in 1944 was the armored shell extended rearwards, offering more protection to the gunners. The added weight and the shift in the center of gravity was the reason to implement the sweep on the wings on later models. The armor plating protected the planes from small arms fire, and many times it could even deflect 20 or 40mm shells. So the planes could take a great amount of damage, earning them the nickname the Flying Tank. But despite the armor, the IL-2 losses were very high. During World War II, more than 10,000 of these planes were lost, but they destroyed tens of thousands of vehicles, including tanks, armored vehicles and transports, making this type the most successful ground attack aircraft of World War II. By the end of the war, the IL-2 production was stopped, and the more advanced IL-10 slowly took the place of its predecessor, and they stayed in service until 1954, participating in the Korean War as well. Though the IL-2 planes were far from perfect, but their ruggedness, simple construction, and capability to take extreme punishment made them one of the iconic aircraft of World War II, which fought on the Eastern Front from the beginning until the very end of the war. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.